So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to HDR Researcher Journeys. I hope you all are having a good day so far. I'm your host, V, and joining me today is Katya, my co-host, and Nicole from Mental Health and Wellbeing team. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. And I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So today we are talking about something that's not confined to, say, HDR or even the academia, but really to every human being, and that's mental health. So I'll firstly like to thank our special guest, Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. Would you like to tell a little bit about yourself before we begin?
Thank you very much. Yeah, look, I come from a background that's probably relevant, as a human being, but I completed a PhD at one point, and I've supervised PhD students and other HDR students at other points in time, and now I serve as a psychologist and counsellor for the Wellbeing services. So I'm a counsellor there, and I'm here today, I guess, to acknowledge that. Studying for any student presents huge challenges, and the things that happen in life can obviously impact that. And that goes for all human beings in terms of what might happen. But I think the higher degree research experience adds a level of complexity to that is a little bit unusual. And so I'm hoping today to sort of be able to talk about that a little bit more, and how to recognize the signs of when things are starting to become important, and obviously to encourage everyone to reach out for support at the early signs, to not feel that it needs to become something significant before they reach out and get in touch with us.
Wonderful, thank you. Um, uh, Katya, would you like to add anything?
No, I'm curious to hear. But I was just thinking that what Nicole said at the end, that it's really important to talk about it early on. Yeah, because I feel like some people don't do it due to various reasons, but I find these things in the long term, they're not getting better if you're not talking about them. So yeah, that was just my little bit for now.
I guess, Nicole, you can begin your talk, and then how this goes is that you give your talk, and then we open the Q&A section, and then people ask us questions, and we just answer them.
Okay, well, thank you. I wasn't really prepared to give a full talk, but I'm more than happy to speak to the subject because, and really around higher degree research student experiences in particular. And the reason why I think that's special in some ways is that people who choose to do and who are accepted into doing higher degree research are there for a really good reason, and it's because they're high achievers, they're high performers. They set standards for themselves that are beyond average. They are an outstanding bunch of people that have chosen to go into that experience. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal to go through that. But because of those standards, because of those expectations, it can sometimes mean that the balance of activities devoted towards study versus other aspects in life can be thrown off. So they come into a higher degree experience, believe it or not, having an actual life to live at some point. There may be partners or children, or there may be parents to care for. Hopefully, there's some friends in there that are really important. There might be work, either at the university or outside of the university, and there might be other commitments to the community or in other ways, for example, to pets, that are incredibly important in their lives. And that's not to mention all of the hobbies and the activities that bring joy to people's lives. When you add to that a higher degree research experience, which comes with heavy expectations and a sense of wanting to achieve there, it really adds pressure to addressing all of the other parts of life that can be incredibly important. And at some point, something is going to get disturbed. But there's also the impact itself of having those expectations, of having a sense of confidence that you're going to be able to do well in the experience that you've chosen to have, of knowing what you're doing, of managing the relationship between you and your supervisor, and the relationship between you and your project. And for people who've had this experience, and I'm sure that all of the, whether or not you've done anything postgraduate or not, everyone who's gotten to this point has attempted study, has done big projects, who has in some way already played out this battle previously. But there are assignments which you can end up hating. You have different relationships with the thesis that you will be developing or the project that you'll be working on. That changes over time. They say it's a journey for a reason, because it does change. The start of the journey and the middle of the journey and the end of the journey look quite different. So at the beginning, it can be feeling quite isolated, feeling unsure about where you fit in with everything. It might be getting to know your supervisor and their expectations. It can be about even getting an idea of what your project is going to be, or what that even looks like, and all of the uncertainty about even getting started on it, let alone launching into a new level of expectation regarding your academic performance. In the middle, staying motivated, maintaining enthusiasm for the project, dealing with all of the delays, the setbacks, and managing the anxiety and stress as it will inevitably pop up seems to be more of the concern. And then towards the end, it is really that resilience and determination to keep going. It might be the worry about the outcome of all of that hard work and effort, and then of course career and life afterwards become different pressures at that point in time. And along that time frame, whatever it might be, it's likely to be years that this becomes a major part of your life. And noticing when things, or that balance, is out becomes incredibly important. The students that come to see us in the counselling service usually come to see us probably when it's a bit too late, when they're at that point where they're finding it difficult to even open their thesis, when they're feeling really low and stressed, or where things have really broken down. So they often come to us quite late, and it takes a while then for the supports to be put in place to get things back on track. Earlier is better. And in some ways, I would prefer to see students using the counselling service as a bit of a motivational service, as a coaching service, in fact, to make monthly appointments with us just to chat about where things are at and whatever worries might be popping up along the way. There doesn't need to be a problem. We can be there as a support just with the psychological aspects of the journey that they're taking. It's hard sometimes to admit you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where it's going, or you've spent the last 3 weeks playing computer games instead of working on your thesis. Avoidance is probably one of the main things that tells us something is not okay. If that's out, if people are finding that they can't face thinking about their thesis, working on the document, working on the project, if they're not attending meetings, if they're not facing what's going on, that's where we would go, that's a really big warning sign. And the earlier that happens, the earlier that's recognised, then the sooner obviously something can be done to support that. And there is lots that can be done to support that. Sometimes just having a conversation can be enough to set things back on track. Other times students will say to us, I'm really tired or exhausted, and that tells us that they're working hard perhaps to try and maintain life balance, but their expectations of themselves in all of those areas is too much, so they can't really do a good job in all of the aspects of their lives as good as they wanted to, and so exhaustion tends to kick in at that point. Sometimes students will tell us that they're lonely, and that's an indication to us that they've stopped connecting. Connecting to others is one of the most valuable elements of well-being. And so quite often students will come to us either with relationship breakdowns or with feeling quite lonely and isolated. And that can come about for a variety of reasons, one of which may be that they've put much more emphasis on their study and haven't kept up with all of the other activities. So people might notice that where they're starting to say no to friends, or they're starting to feel like they can't go out, or they feel guilty even for attending social events when they think they should be studying instead. So that might be some of the early warning signs that would indicate that there are some issues. So if they're noticing changes in the way that they're thinking about their thesis, feeling about their thesis, or in terms of the actions on their thesis, we would call those early warning signs. But we would also look for changes in the way they think, feel, and act on the other activities they've got in their life. If at some point they think, wow, I haven't read a book for fun in 6 months and I used to do that every day, we would call that a warning sign that life is no longer in balance for them. It might mean adjusting expectations or the amount of time dedicated to other activities to accommodate study, but keeping a sense of what's in balance or not and coming back to reviewing that is really quite important. We've had students in the past, in fact, one mentioned to me that they have a spotter, a really good friend who they ask to spot the difference. And that friend calls them on it and goes, hey, where have you been for the last 3 weeks? You haven't been responding to me as usual. And that serves as a litmus test or an indicator, if you like, that someone has drifted off or become too absorbed in another part of their life. So that can be a really good way as well to make the observation, because it's all too easy to become absorbed and not even notice that you're now neglecting the other important things in your life. But I would ask for anyone, I mean, when was the last time you actually sat down and wrote out what the most important things are for you and what's critical in terms of maintaining your well-being? Because there are some things that are really important. When it comes to stress, and of course, study would be a stressor, it's all about the balance between the good stuff and the hard stuff. And as long as the good stuff outweighs the hard stuff, we're fine. We can cope, we can handle things. But as soon as that balance tips, that's when it feels like I can't cope with anything, I can't handle this, and that's when we get lots of problems. So keeping up the good stuff is as critical as to keeping the hard stuff in check in order to maintain that balance of well-being. So investment in the good stuff is necessary and important and critical. And if that stuff is going missing, then it can mean the difference between feeling like you're coping and not.
Thank you, Nicole. That was quite informative. So there's not any questions right now. But one thing I would like to ask is, you mentioned this buddy system, I guess, where you make this one person responsible to making sure that this person checks up on you. So is there a way to, for example, to do this by yourself without depending on someone else?
Look, it's an additional measure. It's not meant to be a replacement. Ultimately, it's all about being accountable to yourself and checking in with yourself. Now, you can do that in a variety of creative ways. Whenever you have to do a progress report, you could have a section for yourself on monitoring your own well-being. You could encourage your supervisor to ask you the question of, how's your well-being going? Or you can make regular appointments with someone to talk about that.
Mhm.
You could also in advance work out, because I think for every person, they know when they're off, when they're not at their best, when things aren't working for themselves, to know what their early warning signs are and just to have reminders to check in with themselves about that. Having a buddy system is just an additional thing to give you that external check. I certainly wouldn't recommend relying on it.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Mm.
And I was wondering, you mentioned that we could this section that we could write for ourselves, and perhaps I was thinking we could keep a diary or something, and every week we check up on it. Would something like that work? or would we just not look at it when we are really deeply stressed? Like, how would it really work out in real life? That's what my question is.
I hear you. And look, it's a really good question. Human beings are not great at looking after themselves. I think that's probably a fairly general truth that we can apply. And when it comes to putting things into routine that involve caring for ourselves, in general, we're not that great at maintaining that. Now, some people love apps that send them reminders each day that ask them, how are you today? And that's a way that can serve as a little bit of a check. Other people love journaling and writing things down, and that's a really important part of their well-being. Other people like things less informal, so they might go out for a walk each day, and on their walk, they might just contemplate how they're going. It's good to have a conversation with someone about it to work out what would most naturally fit with the things that you already do to check in with yourself. The closer it fits to what you would normally do, the more likely it is to be sustained and to keep going with that. So some things work for some people, and other things don't. Some people will just have a sticker above their computer that says, how are you today? Just as a reminder to think about that, or on the back of the toilet door that says, how are you going? So be creative about what you know will stick for you. And if it's not sticking, try and see if there are other things that might work better. But reminders, having obvious reminders somewhere, is a useful way to keep it in mind, whether it's hidden in the fridge or on wherever you find it creative to hide your message to yourself.
I actually have a question as well. Luckily, my supervisors are very open to, hearing about mental stress, and I have experienced this quite a lot in the last few months as an international student, as a lot of other people as well, with everything going on. So I'm someone who, openly speaks about it, but I know people that for various reasons fear to tell their supervisors about that because how they are struggling with expressing their issues, and also in their minds it would be kind of like admitting a weakness, if they would communicate that they struggle. And then I also hear from people whose supervisors encourage them to not have their mental struggles put on record for various reasons, because they think in the long term it might be influence them negatively at some point. So, and I find that very distressing to hear, actually. So do you have any tips for how people could go about expressing their stress and being like also strong at the same time, in terms of making sure their supervisors acknowledge that?
Yeah, this is it's a bit of a tricky one, because there's a lot of difference of opinion on what the role of a supervisor is from the supervisor's perspective. So there are some supervisors who are very open to hearing, understanding, and accommodating the mental health support needs of the HDR students that they're supporting. And in fact, sometimes it goes a little bit too far, and they almost become pseudo counselors or friends even, which, I mean, we could talk about the risks in it going too far down that track. At the other extreme, we've got supervisors who are very standoffish, which is sort of to go, I don't want to hear about that. That's not relevant for me. I hear you, but there are other services you need to go to talk about that. We're just here to do the job of the project, and I'm not really interested in your personal anything, really. So they're much more project oriented, and then we've got supervisors who are more person oriented in the way that they relate to their student. So in part, it would be recognize what kind of supervisor you've got.
Yeah, but with the second one you mentioned, I mean, the one that is project orientated, the personal life is influencing your project. I mean, if you have mental problems or you have personal problems, you can't the reasons why you would have to communicate it to your supervisor is because you can't keep up with deadlines and things. So it's not, and that's when it becomes a problem, when you have to, you kind of have to tell supervisors that you're struggling, and that's the reason why you can't make the deadline for whatever. But they don't recognize it and put you to counseling and expect this kind of everything magically disappear. And that's why you kind of have to, I think students have to rely on the super. An issue of the project as well, if you have if you're struggling mentally.
And I think, look, this is not, in acknowledging the diversity of supervisor approaches, I don't mean to indicate that they're all appropriate either. A lot of the time it is a compatibility match between what student wants, needs, and what the supervisor can or cannot offer. But at some point, if there is a mismatch, at which you might expect at that extreme ends in particular, that there is a significant mismatch, to the extent that it is adding to the stresses of the student, that becomes even more important to look at ways to manage that scenario. Now, we've come across quite a few of these examples in the counselling service, and it really does, this is where we would really go, come in and talk to us and let us get a better picture of exactly what isn't working, because there are some things we can do to encourage change. But there are some ways in which, now just keeping in mind that I'm a counsellor and there are 3 parts of the student wellbeing service. We also have a disability service and a welfare service. Our disability service, which I'll just mention quickly, is there to support students who have a mental health condition that does impact. Now, I don't want to indicate that just because you're going through distress or personal issues, it means you have a condition. I really don't want to pathologize it that way. If there is one, there are things that can be put in place to kind of put structures in place to create adjustments that would be beneficial to adjust for the disadvantages that the student might be experiencing in relation to mental health. If it doesn't quite fall into that category, then it goes into this really grey area where we can advocate for students with their supervisor without having to disclose any of the personal details in their story, where we can support them to request certain changes in the way that that supervision is occurring or on the deadlines that are being presented. But we can also talk to the students about what's actually getting in the way of that and what's impacting them and how that can be managed separately to that. We're not here to fix students or force them to meet the requirements of the supervisor, but rather to encourage a negotiation of how that might work well for both, if it is possible. And we've had some extreme scenarios where that negotiation has not been possible. There has not been an established middle ground that can be met, and that's resulted in a change of supervisor or in some cases the end of candidature. So again, it's we don't want to feel like students have to comply with whatever the supervisor demands, but we do want to have a look at options and discuss those options and do our best to negotiate what's going to work well. And as the wellbeing service, we can support those conversations to be held, depending on how the student feels about it. So I don't know if that answers your question, Katya.
Yeah, it was, I was mainly trying to figure out how someone can approach their supervisors if they have an issue and the supervisor's not very open-minded. But yeah, you answered it, to come to counseling service to talk about a strategy, really, and to go through the options. Yeah.
Thank you, Nicole. That was wonderful. So the next question we have is, any tips for feeling connected and involved with the uni during these lockouts or restrictions?
Again, a really good question. COVID has really disturbed a lot of the good things that would normally come from doing higher degree research. Once upon a time, you could actually go to your postgrad room and be around other postgrads who were working, and you'd have those really useful conversations that would just fill all those little gaps. But it was also an emotional support system where you could share the stresses or the joys of whatever you were going through. And a lot of HDR spaces have been closed down completely. And a lot of people are now working in isolation from home. We've also heard that home is not a great place for doing that necessarily, especially under isolation or the pandemic conditions. Other people are also at home. There's a lot more disturbances than people anticipated. And getting that space where they can kind of compartmentalize just for study only has become a real difficulty. The impact of disconnection on well-being is well known. So if people are feeling like they're not enjoying things the way that they used to, if they're feeling a bit more tired or can't be bothered or aren't as motivated, if they're snacking a lot more or not eating as much as they usually would, if they're starting to feel more guilty or hopeless or just feeling a bit down or yuck, we would expect that. That's what happens with disconnection. In some of the HDR students that I've spoken to who have tried to resolve that have taken to forming groups, Zoom groups, where they just log into the Zoom group to study. So they've worked it out between themselves, unofficial peer support groups, where they don't necessarily talk to each other the whole time, but it's an accountability to being present to study. And they might suggest once an hour to go, hey, does anybody else want a tea break? And then they'll just have chats between each other for their tea break and then get back to study, just to have a sense of companionship and the opportunity to have a sense of connection. But we know that online connection isn't quite the same. But it is an opportunity to talk about study stuff, which, I don't know, non-study people don't always appreciate the experiences. They don't always get the stresses. And if you're all tired of hearing, have you finished your thesis yet? You may want to speak to other people who are also still studying to avoid having to answer that question repeatedly and getting sick of hearing it. So that's one of the ways.
I think one of the challenges is quite unique to Western Sydney University, and I personally experienced that, is because there are so many campuses. I don't know most students actually in my school that also do a PhD. So I wouldn't know how to create a Zoom group with other people because we don't really have these connections. And the person who did ask the question, as far as I understand, they are international students stuck overseas. So I presume they're actually not in Australia, which, I mean, at the moment doesn't really matter if you're in Sydney or somewhere else because everything is online anyway, but it could maybe depending on the time zones. And I just wanted to tell everyone who has the same issue as, well, not issue, but the same struggle as me, like not knowing really other students, especially people that just started right before the pandemic, they might have never seen really their fellow students, but there is a writing session that is facilitated by Susan Mowbray, and I think it's almost every day, and it's usually just people coming together and doing their own work while being connected on Zoom. So there are these things out there to at least get the sense of connection, even if it's not face to face. Yeah.
There are obviously people who are hearing about and coming to events like this. And I guess these are opportunities to suggest, is there anyone else out there who wants to start a study cafe? I mean, I can't remember the name of it now, but there is actually an app, I think it's called StudyMate, where you can actually pay to be part of a group of people who are studying together, which is ridiculous. I am sure that as a group of intelligent people, or at least asking the school if they can send out a message to all of the HDR students in the school for a school-based Zoom session to be started on a regular basis where people can drop in and, you know, from there work out what they want, or at least a discussion board to be created where people can start to share ideas of getting together. I know that now that some of the restrictions are being relaxed, there's a few more people are organising like walks together and things like that. But again, unofficial, not through the university. Usually depending on, like, some people at the campus villages are doing that. There's also some more general student activities for all students, not just HDR students, that are being encouraged. So there's the soup kitchen, which you can get in touch with online. They'll send you the food ingredients and then you enjoy the cooking together experience. And there's some other international sort of student support groups where you can just get in and talk to people. So I would encourage students to look at the whole university community in terms of the events, and just to get engaged in something, or to find a way to reach out to their fellow students and see if anyone might be interested in an activity or event together. I know for some students they're trying to engage with people at home as well, and it's just not the same, and we do know that people are not feeling as connected as they normally would for so many reasons. And I really feel for the international students who came out and started this year, didn't even get to see Australia before they were locked in, didn't get the chance to meet anyone, and they're now in a different time zone to their family and friends, and are just feeling incredibly isolated. And it's hard to say to them, get out there, do something, join whatever you can, stay connected in whatever creative ways you can find, because connection is so important.
Thank you, Nicole. And the next question is, it's a good question as well. Is setting goals for yourself in hobbies a good idea or likely to increase stress?
What is your relationship with having a to-do on your list? Would be my first question to ask. For some people, they love lists, and having a clear idea of things to do so they can check them off during the day works really well for them, and it's a reward to give themselves a tick. You know, the way goals work, as long as the tasks are small enough and achievable, then that can be incredibly helpful. If it serves as a reminder to go, remember that activity you really like doing? Hey, how about doing some of that activity? And here's where you were up to that activity. Give that a go. But for other people, having a to-do list is now just a list of demands that weighs them down, that reminds them of all the things that they have to do where they don't have enough energy to do all of them. And looking at that list tanks their energy.
Yep.
And so I would go, what is your reaction to having that to do, or that list, or that goal? Because if it becomes a burden, then that might not be the best way to do it. So as an alternative, for example, I've heard of people having an activity bowl. So it's a bowl full of scrunched up pieces of paper, like a bowl of lollies. It looks like a treat. And each piece of paper reminds them of an activity that they would normally love to do. So it might be listen to your favorite song, whatever that might be. It might mean read 5 pages of your favorite book that you were reading. It might be go and plant your baby cactus, or perhaps water it.
Yep.
So it's just a bowl full of little things that people might enjoy doing as a treat that they can then go to without it having to be a structured goal. It's just a reminder to do those good things. So if it depends on how you like to use your reminders or set goals. Some people love it. For other people, it becomes detrimental.
Yeah. So I was thinking that one way could be to have really, really simple goals. You know, like wake up today kind of thing. So
look, yeah.
So if you really do want to try, making goals for yourself, the best way to do it would be to have really simple goals.
With really simple steps.
Yeah.
As a psychologist, one of the things that I commonly recommend to people is being aware or beware of saying I have to
Mm.
for anything. As soon as you use that phrase, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, it turns it into a burden. You can, if you want to, rephrase that to yourself as a I choose to or I want to, which changes the whole connotation of what follows. So if you're saying I have to or I should a lot, that's probably a sign that you're seeing a lot of things as a burden, and just changing the way you talk about it can actually give it a different connotation. But yeah, small achievable goals, nothing too long or too significant or big. You've already got a massive one in front of you, might be nice.
And could one goal be, that's one of my goals that I try to do every Sunday, not always achieving though, but to not think about my PhD, to not email anyone, to not look, and not even like using the laptop at all. Like I said, not achieving always, but I'm trying to do like screen-free Sundays. I'm just not checking phone or news or anything. Yeah.
Not only doing that, but not feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, true.
That's the hard part, is actually giving yourself permission to not be a PhD student, because that's one of the dangers, is that it becomes all-consuming, that even when you are doing other tasks in your life or other activities, there's that sense of, oh, I should be on my thesis, or I should be doing this, or I should be thinking about it. Creating time that is just for you, really helpful if you can do it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. So if there's any questions, guys, feel free to pop them in the Q&A section or in the chat. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Just make sure no names. And we'll just wait for a while for everyone to, I guess, ask the question or answer the poll. Otherwise, we'll leave early for today.
I actually have a question, Nicole. Do you know, because what I am personally, I don't know, perceive as a bit of an issue, well, not issue, but I haven't really understood, is that obviously from a mental perspective, or, health, well-being perspective, it's clear that working from home is not beneficial for most people. And I understand the university's reluctance to, allow everyone back, and, in terms of health conditions, but it seems like, I was wondering if you can tell us in communication with university, because I feel a lack of communication about when and what's the plan of as return to campus. It's all very vague. The idea is that from December onwards or end of November, more people will be able to go back, but it's very unspecific. And I think especially me, it would help to know when that could be. Is it 1 more month or 2 more months, regardless of, I understand that it's not set in stone, but I don't know. Are you in touch with the university? Are you trying to, communicate?
I would love to say that I can give you more information, and I will add to the disappointment and the frustration and say, we've been given as much as you've been given. And it is, look, I think this is one of the big pieces of feedback that we're getting at the moment from a lot of HDR students, but other students as well, is going, we desperately need to know when things are going to get better. We are struggling to survive as it is. And if we have a sense of a point of hope where we can go, oh good, it will get better at this point, it will help people relax and go, at least it's coming. At least I know this isn't an endless scenario. And I'd love to give you that date.
Okay.
They are reluctant, I think, to say anything because of the rapid changes that can occur. You can go from borders being open 1 week to shut again the next week, from cities being open to cities being in lockdown, and they're just incredibly reluctant to make anything effective.
Well, but they could get out a plan, kind of, in terms of a preliminary plan in case everything stays positive. Then this will happen. Obviously, if there's a closure, then obviously the plan is not gonna be put through, but at least have a, give the idea of when things go in a good, right way, then this will happen. So, but yeah, I think.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm sort of in the loop of what other universities are doing, and we're probably the most hesitant.
Yes, University of Sydney, I think in Macquarie University, everything is almost back to normal, right?
Yeah, they've got full classes back in full swing.
Which does not help if you know that other students go back and you're stuck at home.
And I think too, look, we've been arguing this for a while now, that the HDR rooms serve multiple purposes for students, but one is the ability to get away from the rest of their lives to dedicate towards their study and have their resources available, and they're set up just the way they need it. That hasn't really resulted in much change this semester, despite some petitions for that to occur. We tried pretty hard for a few of the schools to offer something, and we just kept getting back with students can go and use the study hall just like all the other students, and you're like, it's not really the same.
Yeah, and it's not the same, and the study halls, like, it's a difference if you share a space with a lot of people that come and go, or if you use your own desk every day and you know who else is using their desk every day. So yeah, it's totally different. Yeah.
And with HDR research, there's this sense of protecting the privacy of that research as well. You don't want necessarily your project to be released earlier than you want it to be released. There's a protection of the information that you're developing. This is a precious thing that you don't want other people jumping on. So the privacy to concentrate, the access to the resources as you left them, so you walk back in the next day ready to go from where you were at. There's so many benefits to it.
And your desk is your desk. You don't need to walk around trying to find one. And also what I realized, the informal chats we had in the office about other things as well, but also like my fellow students were telling me, oh, did you know that you have to do this and that? And did you know about that? Is something that it's really, I never noticed until, it wasn't there anymore, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, we're anticipating when next year begins and the main semester starts for autumn, that there will be a lot of the buildings reopening up again for staff to be attending. They may not be in as much attendance as they usually are, but that access now, you won't have to apply to be on campus all the time, for example. So that's the anticipation that we're getting. We're getting this sense for staff that there will be a return to the campus for autumn. Hopefully that means the HDR spaces also get reopened, but I imagine that they'll have to look at the restrictions in terms of occupancy, and for some HDR rooms, that the spaces themselves may not be able to meet the requirements of health and safety. So that might become a problem for some of the HDR spaces, not all of them though.
Yeah, definitely. I guess one question that has come up is, can you give us any advice for cultivating good habits and making them stick? I guess that's more of a broad question, but yeah.
Well, part of me goes, try not to overload yourself with too many things to focus on. Keep it simple and essential. So work out what the critical things are for keeping you okay. From our perspective, we would go exercise needs to be in there and social connection needs to be in there. Those are must-haves for just about every human being. If they're not in there, that's probably going to create some problems. Good sleep and good diet. Those sorts of things would be things that I would recommend. But for anything addition to that, make sure you pick out the things that are critical for you. Know what they are, so start with that. Make a list for yourself of the critical things that you want to keep in your life and schedule them in and set reminders for those things to happen. The idea would to make sure that they're set in at a time that can be accommodated, that is realistic. Some people like to be a bit more flexible and go, well, I'll have these open spaces and here are the activities that I'd like to do, and then I'll review that and check off which ones I've done. But usually with habit, it's about repetition, reinforcing the importance, and making sure you have a way of reminding yourself that that's what you wanted to do in whatever creative way you like to do that, whether it's setting yourself reminders on your phone, alerts on your computer, physical reminders around the place. But having reminders seems to be really important, especially when you've already got a lot on your mind for other things. I mean, you can read all of the books that you like on, 7 healthy ways to maintain habits, but making sure they're important and have a space to be done that can be accommodated and that you're reminded to do them is usually the best way. If there's times where you've gone, oh yeah, I've set this time to do this activity, and then you get to it and then you're like, no, I don't want to do it now, it would be useful to then work out why. Like, am I too tired for that?
Yeah. One thing I do is I have a app called Habits, and you can tick for every day. I don't know if you can see it. Like you can tick for each of the days you have done that thing. So I found that really helpful to develop the habit. So you can
Tracking
try that.
it, monitoring it.
Yeah, because the app also gives you this graph, and you can see yourself going up. So it's a good feedback.
Reward, right? Yeah.
This one's called Habits, Habits, and that's it. I'm sure there are more other interactive apps. This one's free, that's why I have it.
Free ones are always the good ones.
Yeah. Or, free.
Well, free in monetary sense, not in other ways, probably. And
no, there's no ads or anything, so it's either stealing my data without telling me.
Your data, very likely.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I don't have that much to give anyway.
I was just saying, I think nothing is free in this world. And I think just one thing about the habits, I think, and that goes with the goals, is to set achievable goals and habits, like not start running a marathon next week or something, but just go something that you can do so you don't feel like disappointing yourself.
Yeah. And look, that even goes for the thesis, and it's hard because you know what the goal is, and it's this massive thing that you've got this sense of looming over you. But if you sort of think, what's a 5-minute job I can aim to do right now for my thesis, that suddenly becomes like, yeah, I can finally decide what font my thesis title will be presented in, or what color I'll get it bound in, or what referencing, this new reference that I'll add to my list that I've been meaning to add, or I might just quickly check the formatting of this table. When you start to think of it as what's a small thing I can fit in this many minutes, the looming big goal doesn't crush you. So having the big goal is well and good. Mapping out the smaller steps along the way is useful, and just focusing on what's the next most immediate thing I need to do today, rather than having the great big plan weigh on you constantly. So it's good to check in with the big plan every now and again, but not at the start of every day, because boy, that's a rough way to wake up.
Oh yeah. Like when you see your schedule for your Embrace or PhD and see where you are and where you're supposed to be. Not a good way to
don't look at that. No, every now and then, if you think about what's the next step when you finished one, but I'm not really looking at that. But then it depends also on how your data collection is. For example, if you, like me, do qualitative research, you're dependent on other people getting back to you. So you have less control over that than when you only have to read or go to archives or something like that.
And I think that's a really good point to make, is that quite often, whether you're reliant on other people for data or whether you're reliant on your supervisors waiting for feedback, because we know that that's a common problem students have, It's of going, okay, I really wanted this to happen now. I was ready for it. I had set myself up for it. I've actually got the motivation right now. That would be good if we could do it now. And then all of a sudden you're hit with that, frustration. I can't do what I want right now. That's when it's good to have that reserve of going, okay, if I can't do that, I'll do some nice self stuff instead. I will now go out. I'll go camping for the weekend. Stuff it. I might as well take advantage of some downtime and allow myself to go good. Free time. They've given me the gift of free time by making me wait.
You can't really do that when you're doing something quantitative because, it's in front of you.
Oh. Speaking of qualitative data, I need to go because I have my next interview soon. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, take care, Katja.
Yeah.
Nicole, we have one more question. I guess it'll be the last question. That is getting in touch with the supervisors and dealing with the long delays in the feedback. I don't know if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, look, this is, there are lots of things that I think warrant a conversation with your supervisor around expectations and assumptions. And this is a two-way system. The supervisor needs to let you know what to expect, and you need to see if that's acceptable to you or not.
Yep.
There is, where you've had those conversations and an agreement has been made that you'll get feedback within 2 weeks of submitting something, and that's not happening, then you can, like we would always recommend that in the first instance, you remind your supervisor that that's the agreement and that these continue to be problems and that there are consequences for that in terms of delaying you and not being able to progress. But if it continued past that point, then it would be about raising that with someone else to get additional support. So you're welcome to come and talk to one of the wellbeing staff about ways to negotiate that. But there are also some instances, and again, we know that supervisors don't always communicate well, where they're like, actually, October, November, and December are the worst months of the year for us because that's when we've got extra demand from other activities that we're not going to be very responsive in that time frame. So don't, like when you're planning things out, realize that's our slow time. So see if you can coordinate with our slow time where you can then be on your slower time for giving us material to review. So maybe you can work on stuff that is more independent for you. Those sorts of conversations tend not to happen. People are not always aware of the patterns of the supervisor or of the student. Keeping in mind, students have their own patterns as well, where they're like, look, I just can't be as responsive during school holidays. Or I've also teach, and so I get, I'm not available when I have 3,000 assignments to mark. Communicating that can help to negotiate expectations. We would encourage those conversations as much as possible. A lot of the time, students see deadlines as non-negotiable, but they are. They're always negotiable. Even in real life, deadlines are always negotiable, and it's usually just about communication going, I realise we had a deadline for this. I need to set it back until this date. Are you going to be available on that date to review this? So just keep that in mind. Communicate as much as possible and use those email reminders. When you send something, say, here's this that I submitted as just a reminder that you agreed to provide feedback within 2 weeks. So I'll expect to hear from you by this date. Do you want me to send you a reminder 1 week in? I don't know.
So I guess the summary is have a clear line of communication with your supervisor.
Do the best that you can from your end, for sure.
Yeah. So I won't recommend, making an official paper with terms of reference or terms of, conditions, saying you will give me something in 2 weeks and something in this. Rather, what would be better if you, in the email itself, you say that, like, if you could give it to me within 2 weeks, that would be great. Something like that.
Yeah. Or are you going to be available to return this to me in 2 weeks?
Yeah. So that way they will be able to tell you, yes, no, this time is better for me. And that would be more helpful, I guess.
Yep. You could also schedule a meeting for that due time to say, we'll talk about it in this meeting then.
Oh, yeah, that works as well, yeah.
Yeah. Look, this goes to who owns the project. ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your thesis, it's your HDR project. Ultimately, you own it. So you got to drive it and not wait for them to drive it for you. Assertiveness is not always a comfortable place to be, but sometimes can't wait for them.
Yeah. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you, Nicole, again for joining us today. I guess that's our end time now. So I hope this informative was helpful for everyone. And if you have any inquiry or suggestions, feel free to email us. And do you know any library services? I'm not asking you, Nicole, I'm just saying this out loud. If you don't know what kind of library services the university provides, you can join us next time on November 23rd, on Monday, where we'll be joined by science librarian Karen to tell us all that we need to know what library can offer us. And it's not just the STEM basis, but she'll tell us in general what library can offer anyone from any field. So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us. And I guess we'll probably make a session again, and we'll invite you again because
Thanks
this was
very
pretty
much.
good. Yeah. Have a good day, everyone. See